I see it as us, people who create documentaries and docuseries. We're the new long-form deep dive journalists. And that's the gap that we're filling, and people are craving straight news.
Let's discover the Cleveland entrepreneurial ecosystem. We are telling the stories of its entrepreneurs and those supporting them. Welcome to the Lay of the Land podcast, where we are exploring what people are building in Cleveland. I am your host, Jeffrey Stern, and today I had the pleasure of speaking with Shawn Rech, a Cleveland native and Emmy Award-winning producer and director who has created over 200 episodes of television programs that are currently licensed around the world, and several films that have appeared on Showtime, on Starz, and on Netflix. His first film, A Murder in the Park, was named one of Time Magazine's 15 most fascinating crime stories ever told. And in addition to the hundreds of hours of television programs and documentaries he has directed and produced through Transition Studios, where he serves as CEO and co-founder, he is also the founder of two boutique streaming services, AGTV and TruBlu, where he is focused on offering low-cost streaming services featuring factual programming and helping to grow Cleveland's permanent media industry. I really enjoyed working through Shawn's perspective on the importance of factual programming and positively affecting history through truth-telling and documentary productions. Please enjoy my conversation with Shawn Rech. So at this intersection of, a Venn diagram between film, factual programming, and entrepreneurship, you have carved this professional space for yourself to build and tell the kind of stories that impassion you. And I'd love to start, hearing about your draw to each of those areas. Where did your interest in each of them respectively come from, and how has your experience shaped your path to work at their intersection, both as a director, as a producer, but also as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think my experience as an entrepreneur is the reason that we took a little bit different path than most companies trying to make it in entertainment. There's a dynamic, especially out in Hollywood, where filmmakers are very much at the whim of whoever's buying their product or whoever they're partnering with in the product. They limit how much you can make. They take advantage of people's enthusiasm and desire to get things seen or stories out, and they quite frankly rip them off. And the fact that I came from an entrepreneurial background and kind of been a hustler my whole life has given me the skill set to keep those hands out of our pie. And the goal since I started Transition has been to get as many cups out of our revenue waterfall as possible. There are deals out there, film deals, where there are 40 entities being paid and taking cuts, and you're left with almost nothing. So now we're trying to do what the music business has done in a way, which is make this a relationship between the creator of the content and the consumer of the content through one conduit. And that conduit can be iTunes, it can be streaming service. It can be a direct deal with a network or something like that. But we've been very fortunate in that we're willing to say no. One of the biggest deals ever made for a docuseries, which is what we specialize in, was the Jinx. It's not disclosed how much it was, but everybody knows it's the largest purchase ever in docuseries. And the reason was that the person who financed it, Andrew Jarecki, the director, was the founder of Moviefone, and he didn't have to take their money, and he could say no. And he said no a lot. And that's how he ended up getting what he wanted. And a lot of artists and creators and journalists are not empowered to do that. So we just make sure that, first of all, that we don't need their money. We find local people to finance our projects for us, and we reinvest our profits into our projects. And the other thing we do is create our own means of distribution, so that if nobody's willing to offer enough, well, we'll buy it off us. And that's what we're doing by, with starting these streaming services like TruBlu, which will launch this Thanksgiving.
And maybe just taking a step back, if you could unpack a little bit your journey as an entrepreneur, where did that interest come from? How did it start? And how has it developed over time?
It started when I was a kid. I was 6 feet tall when I was 12 or 13 years old. My mother's straight from Germany, and kind of got a hard edge to her. And she said, "You have a man's body. Go out and earn your own money," which I did. So I went out and shoveled driveways and mowed lawns. And my father had kind of a hustler mentality. And he said, "Boy, if you had better equipment, you could probably do more driveways and more lawns. You save up half the money. I'll lend you the other half, and you can get more efficient." That happened, and I saw where I could grow a business just as a kid going to school. And so I was pretty entrepreneurial at a very young age. And I enjoyed the independence that came with having some money in my pocket that my friends didn't have. And if I said, "Hey, let's go to the movies," and the other four guys said, "I don't have any money," I'd say, "Well, I'll pay. Let's go. Let's have fun." So it was great as a kid to, I enjoy working. And I never apologize for trying to make money. My first business, I'm not considering mowing lawns and doing driveways a business. So my first business was actually an engraving business that I started while still in high school. Those are usually mom and pop shops that, do their local high school, and a few little businesses that'll do nameplates or they'll do awards. But I wanted to scale it up and do more of a national company. So we invested in some equipment and also took advantage of the fact that the equipment prices came down right when we were getting into it, and equipped ourselves to handle national accounts. We used to make all the signs inside Bally's health clubs. We did every table tent at Long John Silver's, when you were waiting for your order and you had a number 6 on your table. For the whole country. We did every name badge for every Denny's in the country. Thousands and thousands of apartment signs and directory strips for apartments. And that business turned into a national company. And, these little tiny businesses where people basically started a job, I started something that actually could employ people and ran it for about 20 years and sold it. Then I got into the software business, 3 different types of software. One I got started and sold. The second one was pretty successful. I sold it, but I wasn't paid. They stiffed me and stuck me with a heck of a tax bill because I wasn't careful in how I structured it. The third thing I did was, software-wise, was educational software. And it was a fantastic product, but the company completely flopped because I wasn't cognizant of the corruption involved with education. And everybody I was trying to sell to ended up down the line resigning in disgrace or going to prison.
Oh, wow.
Because of their business practices and how everybody had to kick back money. And I didn't know that game. So I blame that, but I also obviously made a lot of mistakes myself. So that was a colossal loser. And I learned more from that. That was sort of my college education. I did a couple of years at Cleveland State studying economics, but I never earned my degree because my business took off and I was young and arrogant and thought, well, if I make as much as my professors, I don't have to go to college. So after that failure, it kind of, people who've been through a failed business understand it. It'll fry your brain. And I destroyed many relationships too, because I thought I was going to be the hero. And, I had family invest, neighbors, friends, and they all lost on that thing, still repaying them to this day. And sort of went into a deep depression and thought, well, maybe I'm not cut out to be an entrepreneur. Maybe, actually part of me wanted to go out and do driveways and mow lawns again, just to make sure it still worked. So I became an editor of a trade magazine for the multifamily housing industry, and I did that for several years. And I got the bug again. Actually, my boss sensed, he knew me when I was an entrepreneur, when I was running companies. He knew I wanted to get back into something, and he actually helped me financially, and he's my partner now. His name is Ralph McGreevy. So he helped fund the start of transition. I just knew that if I was going to fail again, I was going to fail doing something I absolutely loved. And I've always wanted to make movies. So I thought that television was the path to movies. Now it's become very murky because there's not, television's elevated its game. Movies are kind of crashing. So I'm glad I started in TV, but we do both here at Transition. So that kind of led up to where we're at now.
So a lot of questions from from that, and as we make our way to film and documentaries and factual programming, how did you then go about breaking into this world of film where that was not where your experience and expertise had been at that point in time? How did you break in?
So the keys to breaking in were not listening to anybody when they told me we couldn't do it. A lot of people said you couldn't do it. We wanted to create a show called Warrant Unit, which later became Crime Stoppers Case Files. Ralph, my partner, lived next door to the head of Crime Stoppers, and the sergeant named David Rutt, who ran Crime Stoppers for Northeastern Ohio. Dave, Ralph, and I started this show. So we had access. So we had access to the detectives, which is not always easy to get. But everybody said, no, you're not going to be able to get on TV. They're going to charge you. You're going to have to, pay them $2,500 to air a half-hour show, and you're not going to make any money. They were kind of right about that part. I said, you'll never get it on TV. It's basically what people told us. So I went out and found a young man to be my intern named Brandon Kimber. He now owns the company with us. And he was the first of the filmmakers we hired, and he was extremely good. And we made television, we made quality that looked like what you saw on TV. He was able to do that with his skill set. So basically I delegated the creative part to Brandon. I consider myself more of a journalist and storyteller, so I made sure that I found the right stories. Then the entrepreneurial side kicked in, and I had to kind of create a little bit of competition for these shows, for these stations to want the show. And we ended up getting in on WOIO Channel 19, which is a CBS affiliate. And it ran there for a couple of years. And then we got it on Channel 5, where it ran for a few more years in Cleveland. That show was really successful and we didn't have to pay to air it. They actually, it was what they call a barter deal, which meant that they got half the ad spots and we got to sell half the ad spots, which was tricky and added another element to the business, but at least we weren't paying for airtime and we could go out and sell ads on our program to help finance it. The show had some success, and Miami Crime Stoppers heard about it. The head of Miami Crime Stoppers, a gentleman named Chief Richard Maston, called us and said, hey, I want to do it down here. And so we did, and same thing, I ended up getting it on CBS down in Miami. That show ran for many years. You could still see it, on Tubi and True Crime Television and places like that. We did it in Los Angeles and got it on CBS in Los Angeles, and in Chicago we got it on Fox. And probably the biggest feather in our cap is that, in LA, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, which is surrounded by thousands of production companies, came to Cleveland, Ohio to make their show. And I just thought that was pretty cool. And I think that was sort of a notch in our belt that our quality was good enough that we could hang with anybody.
And all the while you're building out, Transition Studios, you're doing it in Cleveland.
We're doing it in Cleveland, and we're committed to Cleveland. And now we've got 30 filmmakers, 28 of them in Cleveland, and we have an office in Huntsville, Alabama, and Destin, Florida, also, where we do some stuff. But almost all the post-production's done here. We have a 12,500 square foot facility here in Playhouse Square in the Idea Center. We're 2 floors below the film school. We're, the Cleveland State Film School, who runs a steady stream of interns through our business and allows us to cherry pick the best of their talent. But yes, we're very, very committed to Cleveland. I've lived in Cleveland since I was 3 years old, and I'm trying to stop people, and I think we've been successful in this. A lot of people have this idea that you need to head to Los Angeles or to Atlanta or to New York to get into movies and TV. And you really don't. You can do it right here from Cleveland. Until recently, you could fly to LA for meetings for $100. So you can go have your meetings out there. They don't have to know where you live, but you can create the content right here in Cleveland. And that's what we do. And there are benefits to that. To live out in LA, an editor, is going to pay $3,000 or $4,000 rent, where in Cleveland they can have a $1,200 house payment. That enables us to pay them a good living, but not have to pay crazy gig rates that we'd pay if we were out west when we create these programs.
How have you seen the Cleveland's permanent media industry evolve over the time as you've started and built and grown Transition Studios?
There's a pretty established, significant permanent media industry here, but most of them aren't doing public stuff. Most of them are doing commercial work. There's a very large studio in the Cleveland Clinic, but that's an internal constituency. We've obviously got our TV stations, but there are companies in Cleveland that are quite large that just focus on education, focus on commercial work, which we've done some of that in the past, and we're still willing to. But not many of them venture into trying to create content for Netflix or whoever. Everything, by the way, every movie we made pretty much has ended up on Netflix. So that's kind of the gold standard these days for where you want your stuff to end up. I don't know if we're making a docuseries criticizing them, so I don't know if they'll ever air anything of ours again. But we've got to tell the truth. So
that sounds fascinating.
Yeah, I can get into it if you want. It's really
sure. Cool. I'd love to hear about that. We'll go on a detour.
Yeah, the biggest crime docuseries in history was Making a Murderer. I think it had the highest viewership. They don't really release their numbers, but I think worldwide, over 100 million people watched Making a Murderer. I watched it. It was fascinating. Loved it. And then I did a little bit of research and found out that I was completely tricked. They didn't tell the whole story at all. They created facts. They edited testimony. The filmmakers, when they made that documentary, and it's really important in this business. We consider ourselves journalists. They use narrative filmmaking techniques and kind of Franken-edited that series. And now that it's coming out that it was really dishonest, it's going to lower the stock of all of us who make these types of programs. So it's very important that we created it's kind of like the third season of Making a Murderer, but it sets the record straight. It's called Convicting a Murderer. It may be renamed before we release it. It's going to be done actually next Friday. We've been working on it for about 5 years and spent millions of dollars on it. But it's basically it should be a pretty big deal because it's gonna show a lot of people how they were tricked by some pretty dishonest filmmaking.
Well, I think that's maybe a great segue actually to talk about the mantra that I know you have at Transition, which is positively affecting history. And I think it's really interesting and important to get your perspective on this, because I think that's exactly right. When we deal with the past and deciding which version of history we want to recognize or which stories from it we want to tell, effectively we're going through what we want to remember and what we want to forget. And it's why I think it can become so politically charged and why historians actually have great influence given our multiplicity of views about the past and its significance for the present as a society. And I think this framing of positively affecting history is important. I'd love for you to unpack what you mean by that and how you think about, stewardship. How is it that you tell the stories that you're telling and your
Right.
commitment to factual programming?
Well, we do a lot of media criticism. We've criticized the media in probably every movie we've made because there's lazy journalism out there. There's unethical journalism. There are people who are too cozy with one side of the story. So setting the record straight is very important to us. I believe we're the only filmmakers to have had a hand in 3 wrongfully convicted or over-sentenced prisoners walking out. It's really fun to walk out of prison with somebody and film it, and because of the work of the people you're filming or because of your work. So that's another kind of feather in our cap. But so that we think that's positively affecting history. But here's the thing. When I am about to close my eyes for the last time and meet my creator, I don't want to look back and say, yeah, that company was a success and we filmed pretty ladies whipping wine on each other, and having cat fights. God bless basketball wives and shows like that. Everybody has to make a living, but I just wanted to do something that's a little more consequential. But the trick is to do it in a way that you can make money. So that's what I think we're achieving now, is kind of an intersection between socially important and sticking to genres in which there's always an interest. Crime isn't what they call an evergreen genre. It never goes dark. People always have a craving for crime programming. So that's that's a lot of what we do is crime.
And there's always going to be crime, unfortunately.
Yeah, different types. Now, my partner in TruBlu, our new streaming service, my partner is Chris Hansen. So now we do all the predator investigations. That's called Takedown with Chris Hansen now. So we go to Michigan and Florida and California and catch bad guys who are trying to meet children. We are exposing scammers. Our footage is frequently requested by both sides in legal cases to prove their point. And we even have some religious programming that Brandon is really passionate about. Our biggest movie ever was called American Gospel, Christ Alone. And that movie criticized faith healers and tricksters and hucksters, and pointed out that if they call themselves Christian, that they're in error. And even that is kind of correcting the record, at least for Christians. So pretty much everything we've done has been like, hey, take a look at this. You're doing it wrong, and here's why.
So as you kind of worked through the maturity of Transition Studios over time, at what point do you start thinking about TruBlu, right? Like what are the questions that you're asking? What are you trying to validate? What vision did you have for the future that kind of warrants the creation of a different organization relative to the work you're already doing and the stories you're telling through Transition? So
TruBlu came about because I've got to back up a little bit. I told you that American Gospel, Christ Alone was our biggest film. It created so much thirst for that type of content that we ended up creating a boutique streaming service called AGTV. If you wanted to see the website, it's watchagtv.com. And that service is a success. I mean, we're not even 2 years into it, and it is successful streaming service as a boutique streamer. And I learned the streaming business when we started that company. And it's just focused on that sort of content. While I was doing that, during the woke movement, Hollywood was responding to pressure by canceling very popular programs. They canceled Cops, they canceled Live PD, Crime Watch Daily went off the air. They didn't want to be associated with police, and people want that programming. Now Cops has been resurrected by Fox. Reels just resurrected Live PD, which we were going to do, but they beat us to it, so God bless them. So it's basically, I said, there's going to be a thirst for true crime programming. They're out canceling it despite it being such a big part of the revenue stream. So they're shooting themselves in the foot to look like they're on the right side of history. And the demand is out there for it, so we're going to provide it. And we're going to create original content, and we're going to license content. So TruBlu uses Transition as a vendor, of course, but we're a buyer. We buy other people's content. We're licensing hundreds of films from Gravitas, also here in Cleveland. They moved here back from Hollywood to Cleveland, and they control 3,000 films. So we're a buyer, and basically what it is a little Netflix that'll launch on Thanksgiving Day that's just dedicated to factual programming, social issues, and true crime, and some civil rights. So that's the vision. The vision, I'd love to say, I had a dream and, this needs to happen, but I'm going to be honest with you and tell you I saw a hole in the market and decided to fill it.
Mm. Maybe you can share a little bit of context on what the market looks like, right? What is the state of documentaries today, a factual programming? Maybe how has it evolved? How has it handled the transition from the old media vehicles to streaming? Just where we are with all of that, and what was the actual gap?
No one will debate that factual programming is bigger now than it ever was. No one's going to debate that. What they will debate is why. My theory why is that organizations that used to deliver straight news all, for whatever reason, decided to pick a side. MSNBC went far left, CNN went slightly left, Fox went far right. There's some other kookier ones that are even farther right. And it seems like no one besides maybe BBC and PBS are delivering straight news. So I see it as us, people who create documentaries and docuseries, we're the new long-form deep dive journalists. And that's the gap that we're filling, and people are craving straight news, or if you do have a bias, that it's implied, and you're pretty transparent about what your bias is. We do have a bias when we're trying to get someone out of prison, for instance. It's pretty clear that we're trying to tell the story so that something changes, but you just have to be honest about that. I think that the hole I saw was the hole in news. Everything is just far left, far right, and somehow that's what's paying off for them. But the market has hurt journalism, so we're filling the gap.
Is there, or I guess, how do you think about competition and differentiation? When I just as a consumer of different media, there's this. It's overwhelming, honestly, this proliferation of different streaming services. We've gone through the bundling, unbundling, rebundling of all these different streaming services. How do you think about competition in the space and differentiating, TruBlu as a service?
Well, I believe that, our TruBlu's content is going to be licensed to other networks as well. And studies show, research shows that does not cannibalize your own audience for some reason. It's amazing. You can have it on a different network and still not lose subscribers on your own network or viewership. What's going to differentiate TruBlu is integrity, and people, I think, can spot when you're telling a story straight and not putting a slant on it, and the quality of the programming and the quality of the stories. Our first film, A Murder in the Park, when I watch it now, I cringe at some of our cinematography and the way we did things, but the story is so great that it still made Time Magazine's list of the 15 most fascinating true crime stories ever told. It's the story. So we find really good stories, really interesting stories. I've got a pretty good nose for what people want to hear about and see. So it's the quality of the stories that are going to bring people to TruBlu. And there's a viral, Chris Hansen's previous investigations are one of the most downloaded things and viewed things ever. I think we tallied 500 million YouTube views of various, predator investigations from the past. So, now that franchise is restarted as Takedown with Chris Hansen, people are going to be able to see fresh episodes of that on TruBlu. We have a civil rights show that's unlike anything anybody's ever done, called The People in the Pictures. We were filming in Alabama last week, in which we take some iconic, some never seen photos of something involving civil rights where there's an oppressor and a victim. And we find those people, and we find out if they've changed. And if they changed, how did they change and why did they change? And we do a super deep dive into a photo. We find the people in it. Picture Ruby, the young girl who was walked in by marshals during desegregation. All these, there were a bunch of white high school girls just screaming at her with scowls on their face. How many of them have mixed grandchildren now, and have they changed? How do they feel about their behavior back then? This is the type of thing we're exploring. I think that's really compelling television. I don't think I've seen anything like that on TV before. So that's the sort of thing that I think will draw people to TruBlu.
Yeah, no, I think that is quite powerful. What do you find are the biggest misconceptions people have about documentary filmmaking, and what perhaps do you wish people knew or understood about the space?
People need to understand that you need to check documentarians' work. You can't totally trust them right now because we don't have established ethical standards in this space like journalism does or like attorneys do. We need to establish a voluntary set of standards. We need to tell people who paid us to make it. We need to tell people if we have a point of view up front. There needs to be some disclosure, and we're pushing for that with one of our projects. That's how it ends. We ask for the filmmaking community to establish these standards. So I would tell people to check the work you just watched. It's pretty easy these days. There's usually a Reddit thread on everything that comes out, and you can see both points of views and check for yourself if you're passionate about the subject.
Across transition, the kind of founding here of TruBlu, and the success you've had with AGTV, what has surprised you the most on this leg of your journey?
Well, the biggest surprise is the success of the Christian films. Brandon Kimber, our creative director and the president of AGTV now, who was our first intern, who we hired for $150 a week stipend, 14 years ago. He didn't want to do any more murder. So we did all these, hundreds of episodes of Crime Stoppers, and we had to deal with, families who were just torn apart by the death of their sons. And we're softies, and it affected us profoundly. We really, it got to us, and we didn't want to do it anymore because we felt so bad for these families, and we kind of empathized and suffered with them. So he said, and he's a devout Christian. He said, I just don't want to do this anymore. No more murder. And I promised him we would do a movie, I think, on adoption, because I was adopted, and that never materialized. And I said, we're going to do another movie. And he said, what's it called? And I said, oh boy. I said, it's A Murder in the Park. And he said, no, I'm not doing it. I said, Brandon, if you do this, if you edit this film and shoot it with me and the team, I will let you make any movie you want to make, any movie you want. And he said, fine. I didn't know he was like loaded and ready to go. He said, I'm making a movie about the gospel and about false preachers and people who are in rebellion, who call themselves Christians who aren't. I said, fine. And I turned around, went to my office, and said, well, that's going to be expensive, and no one's going to watch that. That's one time in which my instincts were totally dead wrong. I told him, I said, Brandon, people want high stakes. Crime, that's high stakes. And he rolled his eyes and walked away. And then we just self-released American Gospel, and it's this massive, massive success. I mean, just staggering success. And he came to me and took a shot at me, and he said, Shawn, what's higher stakes than eternal salvation? And I realized he kind of had me there. And that's the higher the stakes, the higher the viewership. And, it's serious stuff for a lot of people. And I was surprised by the success of that film. And then the fact that we had a successful sequel, have a third one coming, and could create a streaming service with 800 hours of content and tens of thousands of subscribers from that film. That was the biggest surprise in this journey. And I was totally wrong, and I'm glad I was wrong.
As you think about the future and what's coming next, what has you most excited over the next year and change? And maybe at that point we can tie it back to Cleveland as well, and what has you excited about the development of Cleveland's film scene?
What has me excited is that people are starting to believe me when I say you don't have to move. That's what excites me. We're kind of living proof that you can stay here. You don't have to leave. You can make great stuff. Every time we hit, a single or a home run, we're showing future creators from Cleveland that they don't have to move to LA. There are a lot of Clevelanders out in Los Angeles, believe me. Some of the biggest shows ever were, run by Clevelanders and created by Clevelanders and written by Clevelanders. Why are we developing this talent and losing it? That's probably what I'm most excited about. It's starting to work. People always ask me, "Oh, do you must do a bunch of stuff with the Film Commission?" And it's like, no, that's completely different. Their mission is more akin to like the Sports Commission or the Convention and Visitors Bureau. They're trying to bring money in and bring outside productions in, but those people come in, film, and leave, and hopefully use some of our workforce. This is completely different, in that we're creating permanent jobs. I want everybody here to eventually start their own company, or, I tell everybody who comes here, even as an intern, one day, if everything works out, we want you to direct a film, if that's your goal. So that's what excites me now, is seeing how the future looks here in Cleveland.
No, that is quite exciting. I think the witnessing of the narrative changing, that is progress.
I think so.
So we'll close it out here, keeping it with Cleveland in focus. The closing question that we have for everyone on the show is not necessarily for your favorite thing in Cleveland, but for something that other folks may not know about Cleveland, a hidden gem, if you will.
My hidden gems, I'm a fat guy. You're not doing video, but people would see I'm a fat guy. My hidden gems involve how good our food scene is. But the other thing I usually have to educate people, that I have to bring them up to speed on, is our arts infrastructure. The robber barons, a century ago, really, really funded some incredible stuff. I think something that some more people should know about are things like the Cleveland Orchestra and some of the museums we have near Case Western Reserve and that whole area. I think that the problem with it, I was going to bring up food, but like these places are dropping like flies. It's killing me. I used to love taking people to University Inn, Sokolowski's, because they could have a meal that was exactly like their grandmother made in the 60s or 70s, but that they chose to close. But I don't want to end on a negative note. But I think our arts infrastructure is something that a lot of people don't understand or know about. And I think that our philanthropic infrastructure is amazing. The Cleveland Foundation is incredible, and it's huge. And a lot of people aren't aware of the work they do. So I think that those are probably the maybe not so hidden gems, but things that aren't talked about enough.
Yeah, no, I think those are awesome. Well, Shawn, I really appreciate, you coming on and, sharing your own story in addition to many others. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. If people want to sign up and possibly check out the new service when it releases Thanksgiving, just go to watchtrublu.com. That's where they can catch up on what we're doing.
Wonderful. And if folks had anything they wanted to follow up with you about, whether that be TruBlu or Transition or AGTV or any of the work that you're doing, what is the best way for them to do so? Oh,
just email me. It's Shawn, SHAWN, @transitionsstudios.com. I'd be happy to answer any questions anybody has.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Shawn. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's all for this week. Thank you for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show. So if you have any feedback, please send over an email to jeffrey@layoftheland.fm or find us on Twitter @podlayoftheland or @sternjefe, JEFE. If you or someone you know would make a good guest for our show, please reach out as well and let us know. And if you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes or on your preferred podcast player. Your support goes a long way to help us spread the word and continue to bring the Cleveland founders and builders we love having on the show. We'll be back here next week at the same time to map more of the land. The Lay of the Land podcast was developed in collaboration with the Up Company LLC. At the time of this recording, unless otherwise indicated, we do not own equity or other financial interests in the company which appear on this show. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of any entity which employs us. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.